Her new novel, 10 years in the writing, I understand. 11 years. Ooh, man, imagine. Well, it's that good. Don't Be a Stranger is the name of this, her newest novel. Ivy Cooper is our lead character, 52 years old. There is a romantic collision between her and Ansel Fleming, who is 35 years old, a musician and ex-con. And when this collision happens, their physical chemistry quickly becomes overpowering. I love the Elizabeth Strout quote about your writing. Susan Minot's writing is like a diamond knife on ice. Yeah, y'all please welcome Susan Minot. All right, this is an affair. She's a single mom in New York City. They meet, and he is a handsome, dashing sort of rock star character. He is an ex-con. There was no violence involved in his crime, but he did 7 years. She knows going into this affair, this is crazy, this is wrong, this is probably a mistake, and plunges right into it anyway.
So wise.
Yeah, well, we love her. I'm sure there are women who read this and think, what a dummy. You mentioned some women just maybe want to slap.
Just want to slap her. Yeah.
Tell us about Ivy Cooper.
One of the reasons I wrote the book was to try to describe a character who doesn't always do things that sort of on paper look like they're in her best interest. We're all supposed to be doing right by ourselves all the time, right? And we don't always, as Nabokov said, the interesting thing about humans is their capacity for self-delusion.
Ooh.
And so she is not only is she a human, but she is recently divorced. The father of her 8-year-old son, Nicky, lives far away in Virginia, so it's not even a shared kind of custodial situation. So she has this quite incredible pressure, and she doesn't have a lot of money, and she's kind of living in New York, and she's a writer, and so there's a lot she has on her plate, so that when this much younger person who's very unlike anyone she's ever met sort of appears and seems to have a little twinkle in his eye for her, she kind of thinks, well, this would be nice, this would be, and maybe because it doesn't seem to have a future, it's almost perfect, right? But to give herself a little other life than the single mom life she has. And another reason, when you're writing a book, especially if you keep writing it for 11 years, you start thinking of, oh, well, actually, this would be an interesting thing to explore. And so the setup also is interesting to think about. Mostly the job of a mother is so all-consuming that you don't really have time for anything else. And so if there's any erotic aspect inside you, it gets maybe shut down, or does it have to? Or can't a mother have some erotic life? Or so I wanted to see if that was possible for a while, at least.
Oh, yes. Now describe Ansel Fleming for us. He's not the best communicator. He's pretty, especially when it comes to, as we mentioned, texting back and so forth. He's pretty concise. He's evasive and he disappears, but I would put forth that he actually is not a bad communicator. He's pretty straightforward with her, which again is unusual and strikes her. He's very clear about, he has no strings on her, right? He wants to be on his own, and if she's interested in that, he doesn't even put it even that much of a contract. He's just very clear about who he is. And that's appealing in this world where we have a great capacity for self-delusion. And yes.
People don't always represent themselves.
It's down to the point where he says, yeah, I'm free for the next hour.
She's like,
I'll
okay.
be right over. And she's no dummy. We don't ever feel like this woman is just so pitiful and desperate. It's not that way at all. It is like you described.
I hope not, because I made her be a writer and be someone who is very much, thinking about how best to live her life, and is she doing something because someone thinks she ought to, and what's her sort of true intention. And so she's very much, it's not the unexamined life. She's examining her life a lot, and doesn't always kind of ascribe to what society tells her she should be doing.
She, as you mentioned, she's a writer and he's a musician, and Ivy says at one point that the difference between music and reading, with reading it requires all of your attention. With music, you can almost be running around the house doing things, there are totally different art forms. I mean,
yeah, the way a person taking in music doesn't require a lot of attention. You can give music a lot of attention, but it's something that it can reach a lot more people. It requires less sort of processing, but you cannot read a book. You can even watch a movie, you can kind of look at a painting a little bit, but you can't read a book unless you give it your total attention. So that absorption between a reader and a writer is very unique.
She also mentions, and I don't know if you think this is true in what we call real life, but that male writers talk about their writing more than female writers do. You think that's
I've noticed that, actually, in my...
That's actually a truism, you think?
I think so, yeah. I think maybe this big generalization, but maybe men are it's less surprising for people to be interested in what a man is doing than what a woman is doing. So that would tend to, encourage men to just go on about what they're doing.
Yeah, they're so boring.
No, they can be interesting too.
Before we hear you read some from this wonderful novel, I did want the audience to understand that you have something of a history with Oxford, Mississippi. You've been coming down here, I believe, since the 90s. And around these parts, there's kind of a famous picture of you and all the other writers of Seymour Lawrence, who we knew as Sam Lawrence, who was a great publisher back in those days. And I'm talking about Thomas McGuane, yourself, Jim Harrison's, Barry Hanna's in the picture, Jane Ann Phillips. So you were very much sort of in this almost boys club, but tell us a bit about Sam.
It's a bit of a boys club, yeah. I actually first came to Oxford in 1978, I think. 1979. And I was driving across country, and I came to Oxford to, make a pilgrimage to one of my favorite writers, to Roanoke, and because Faulkner was, I was telling you this backstage, but he was the first writer, not who made me want to be a writer, but I sort of wrote kind of obsessively, trying to figure out what I thought. I write in my journals and stuff, but when I read The Sound and the Fury, which I sort of half even understood what was going on,
Right.
But it went past my understanding. I mean, I think there's even a line in The Sound. No, it might be in Light in August, but memory believes before knowing remembers.
Oh, yeah.
And that, I was understanding before I even knew what was going on, but I remember reading that book and feeling the world sort of shift in this big way. And I thought, it's like chunk, the world sort of moved. And I didn't think, oh, I want to be a writer. I thought, I want to do that to people. So that was old Bill Faulkner.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and actually this book, I think at the heart of it, it's an older woman, which you don't usually read about a 50. She actually turns 53, almost very close to the beginning of the story. So she's mostly 53 and 54, and that isn't usually a heroine of a novel. Not a lot of books about
No,
a
that's true.
54-year-old.
There are a lot of aspects of this book that we really haven't seen before.
But it was Faulkner's, the age-old subject of the heart in conflict with itself. Our real subject. So.
All right. Well, we do want to hear a little bit from this novel again. It's called Don't Be a Stranger. One more time, y'all, for Susan Minot.
All right.
I'm just going to read two little sections just to give you a taste. And this part is Ivy Cooper, who has an 8-year-old son, Nikki, sort of contending with single motherhood. She's met this man, Ansel Fleming. They had one night together, which was very surprising to her. It sort of happened without any planning. But it's given her a little spring in her step, and it sort of makes her feel how much she'd been sort of trudging along, sort of upset about her divorce, which she's been divorced for about a year. So, life with a child was standing at the counter with a knife and wooden plank, puncturing tomatoes, peeling carrots. It was the stove with a spoon, stacking dishes, upending cups, sweeping, sponging, folding socks, plumping pillows. You filled the laundry basket, unzipped the coat, heeled off boots. There were sounds of the dryer, the cartoon whistling, the water filling a soapy pan, burners lighting with a puff, wrappers tearing, crinkling, rain through the open window. It was glancing up and seeing all the places one was not, and herself there in them, tilting on a dusty hill, hauling ropes in tumbling surf, weaving through dark crowds in a moonlit square. She was not kneading bread on stone, examining a patient's bones, not guiding the lost through a mountain pass. No, she was putting napkins under forks and setting 8 plates around the table for the people coming to dinner. It was scrubbing, refolding, crumpling, hugging, pouring, wiping, heating, brushing, corking, and always the thoughts splitting in. Is this really my life? Is this the best I can do? Ivy saw how much she'd been dragging herself along, dutifully plodding to the store, dazed as soon as Nikki was asleep, turning to the blue screen to disappear into a movie to fill her stupefied brain. This new joy made her more patient with Nikki. She felt the love for her son like something sharp, and also something she would never be able to express. That night, Ivy was brushing her teeth when Nikki called from his bed, wanting to be tucked in. "I'm feeling neglected," he said. "Coming," she laughed. She climbed up onto the loft bed and lay beside him in the gray dark. "Mommy," he said, "did you know that God is everywhere in the air?" "That's what people say," she said, hedging. In the evening, she often heard his ruminations. "Do mermaids pee out of their bosoms? Why does your brain disappear when you close your eyes?" Nikki made his fingers like scissors cutting the air. "That means I'd be snipping God's hair right now." Ivy smiled in the dark. "And," Nikki said, "he's as long as you want him to be." So this other part is she's in bed with Ansel Fleming and dares to sort of say, what's your story here? And he basically says, "I have no interest in being in a relationship with anyone. I have a lot of different people I see." And she sort of has a long pause of rumination, which lasts probably a second, but in the book it's a page and a half. If she had believed this, she would have said to herself, "Okay, this has been interesting. We've had a lovely moment, and it has given me a real boost." She would have removed herself from his stretched out legs and away from his dense dark arms and have sat up. She would have thanked him and would have said goodbye. But she felt a new self in her, peering down into an unknown canyon. Maybe this canyon would suit this new self. She wouldn't know if she didn't try. She'd always believed in fidelity as a given in a relationship. But what had that guaranteed finally? Maybe it was the time to learn different ways. People generally measured the success of a relationship by time. Endurance was valued overall. But was that the most important thing? Shouldn't the measure be how much love there was, however long that lasted? But then how could love even be measured? Ivy had not sustained an uninterrupted partnership with a man. She had been married to Everett for 10 years, but she had left all the earlier ones. Being with someone in a different, possibly undefined romantic relationship might teach her something. Maybe this was where she'd been working to arrive at all this time. She was older now, she could be more discerning about her body's enthrallment. She'd known pretty many men in various configurations, as boyfriends, flirtations, intrigues, crushes, even affairs, and it made for a long line of sentimental education, studded with solid posts of more substantial relationships. Her first longtime boyfriend she'd known since 15, and the ones after were mostly solid and polished, like pearls on a string, one at a time, official boyfriends, this one for 6 months, 2 years, 2 months. There'd been a lot of boys and men around in those days. When they were young, always a new one entering the door, but now the men were mostly gone, into families, into longer commitments. But if you didn't keep with the commitment, you failed. That was how people put it. People rarely said that a relationship or marriage came to its conclusion, or that it ended, like a good story in the right place. No, if a marriage ended, it failed. Of course, there were varied geometries of relationships. A parent and a child, for instance, had a relationship with the goal of ending. For a child, leaving the relationship was the goal. The relationship succeeded when it ended. What if people could think of love that way? Once lovers no longer had the same interlocking need for each other, then their time with each other was done, and they would be encouraged to move on. But that wasn't the common wisdom. The common wisdom was that after the first spark of love, love would grow and change and become something else. All of this was considered in a matter of seconds. Most of these thoughts were not new. The part of Ivy that believed in fidelity, in one's body remaining reserved strictly for one's lover, stayed tucked back in the shadows where it had never questioned itself, so certain an aspect of love it was. It may even have slipped behind the dividers in her mind, not needing to see what might happen next. She did not get up, she stayed. Thank you.
Susan Minot, y'all. Susan Minot. Don't Be a Stranger. The book is from Kanaf. And Susan will join us after the show at the table and sign your copy of Don't Be a Stranger. Quite a wonderful read. You will love Ivy, you will love Nikki, and Ansel, maybe not so much. But great novel, great 11 years in the writing, and it's all right there. All righty, y'all.